Renault and Alpine have been absolutely crushing it in terms of new cars. In fact, this is proving that retro revivals are real big sellers. As a matter of fact, I think this could open up an entire window of opportunity for Renault and Alpine because there are so many names that they could revive. In fact, here are just a few which I think would be big sellers. The Renault Fuego. This car was underrated, to say the least. It was flawed. In fact, when it came to America, it did have a small problem of setting on fire. However, they may have a platform to revive it. The Renault Austral, a hybrid with around 200 horsepower and a 1.6, also a manual. Okay, so yes, it's a crossover, but with some tweaking, I reckon that they could turn this into a pretty good coupe. They could turn it into a sports car. They may or may not do this. There is potential for them to bring it back as a hybrid or maybe even an electric car. Either way, they will have a front-wheel drive sports car with around 200 horsepower, which is ideal to take on the Prelude. Back in the 50s, Renault built a small rear-engined convertible and coupe called the Caravelle, which they sent to the US, but it wasn't very successful, unfortunately. However, it could be a modern MX-5 rival if they build a new one. They could make a fully electric one based off the Alpine A110, and it could be a softer sports car, which would be ideal for an older demographic or some people who enjoy a convertible to take on long distances. It could also be cheap as well. So maybe Renault could tap into the affordable sports car market with a new Caravelle. Last year, Renault made a new Espace, a 7-seater SUV. Now, that's kind of wrong. So maybe for the generation after that, they could revive the Espace minivan with this sort of styling. Back in 1984, this concept absolutely stunned onlookers back in the Geneva Motor Show who didn't really know what it was. What it was a new type of car altogether. In fact, by reviving this, Renault could make a new minivan, which in recent years is a market which has been very slowly declining. So maybe a new Espace could win fans over with the same nostalgia as the Renault 4 or the Renault 5. The new Renault Clio. Yikes. That is a very ugly front end, I'll admit. That is not very nice to look at. However, it does have some more power. 1.8 litre hybrid with 160 horsepower, which is pretty good. So imagine an Alpine version, a bit like the Clio Williams, a Formula 1 inspired version. 200 horsepower, there or thereabouts, maybe a manual, doesn't matter if there isn't a manual, but it could be a rival to the Mini JCW, it could also be very cheap, and it could also be limited run, making it very, very collectible. In fact, this could definitely win fans over again with 90s nostalgia. If Renault were planning on making a flagship track car, maybe they could take an Alpine A110 and remove the roof, or remove the windscreen and make a Barchetta. I'm talking about bringing back the Renault Sport Spider, which was Renault's attempt to take on Lotus. In fact, it was the last car to ever be built at the Dieppe factory in Normandy where Alpine was based. However, that factory is now open again, so maybe they could revive this car as a modern day track car to try and take on some of the smaller British companies and tap into that growing market of track days. In fact, they could make a Cup series like they did back in the 90s. So there you go, these are 5 cars which Renault and Alpine could revive and maybe become super popular. So what do you think of these cars? Do you think Renault and Alpine should revive any of these? Or are there any cars that I missed? If so, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.